We will continue our discussion on leadership. Again, we repeat, leadership is influence. The currency of leadership is influence. If you have no influence, you are not a leader. You can be a manager, but you cannot be called a leader. And it will be very, very important that you understand when we discuss about leadership. We are talking about that group of people who are so admired. People voluntarily follow them. People voluntarily will be with them. Not because of a salary, they do not even need a salary, but because they believe in the person and they believe in the vision of the person. That's who we are talking about when we talk about a leader. And you can be a manager, and as a manager, you choose to be a leader. So that people are not following you because of the salary you pay them, but they believe in you. You have a much easier time as a manager if you actually choose to have a relationship with your people, not as subordinates, but as followers. But to become a follower is not easy. To become a leader is not easy, because there must be something in you that causes you to be that kind of a person who is admired and can be followed. We want to pick a Bible character and try to draw lessons from him. Now, the character we have chosen is called Mathew, but sometimes it's called Levi or Levi, the tax collector. And he was a disciple of Jesus Christ. You know, this apostle Mathew was the son of a man called Aphias. And this man called Mathew lived in the coastal village of Capernaum. Jesus went to Capernaum many times. There are no records of his early life. What was he before he became a Roman civil servant? We don't know. Because by the time he's introduced to us, he's a tax collector or what they were calling those days negatively as a publican. During this time, Herod Antipas is the one ruling. Matthew chapter 9 and Matthew chapter 10, Herod Antipas. But basically the taxes are collected for the Romans. Since he worked as a tax collector, it was possible that Mathew, of all the 12 apostles, was the wealthiest disciple of Jesus. In fact, you ask yourself, Jesus, I thought you were a rural guy. Why would you get somebody who is swimming in money? He is swimming in money such that he can even pay back anybody whom he has cheated 4 times. But you know, we learn several things out of this. Even the wealthy can become righteous leaders. Even the corrupt can change and become righteous leaders. And so, do not condemn yourself because of your wealthy background. And that you will not get influence. That you will not end up helping people to reach their Canaan. It is possible any person, whether rich or poor, to get this kind of admiration that causes people to want to be with you. And Mathew, possibly the wealthiest apostle, is counted among the people who brought transformation for the whole world on earth. But it's not just a question of wealth. It's a question of history of corruption. A lot of people try to hold you responsible for your background. Oh, your parents were thieves. Even you are corrupt. If you choose to say no to it, there is a God who forgives the past and who can begin again. Initially, there may not be many followers. But if you are consistent in your new way of life, you will get those people understanding, agreeing with your vision, getting to accept your person and trusting it, and they will go with you. So the first lesson we learn in leadership out of Mathew is wealth cannot stop you becoming a leader as long as you know how to manage it. We don't hear of a story of Mathew acting like a sponsor. We don't hear of a story of Mathew trying to be lord over the poor fishermen. No. He forgets about the wealth. He comes in to the mission that's at hand. Similarly, don't come into leadership and start to, throwing your money around, trying to show how rich you are. It will interfere with your influence. You need to come to where you trust, you are with the people trust you and walk with you. And they do not feel intimidated by your aware of the background. You know, Matthew was an accurate record keeper. Very, very, very accurate. And it's important to understand as an accurate record keeper, he ends up recording what he made so of Jesus for us to read. He knew the human heart and the longings of the Jewish people. So when he writes his record, they are like aimed at the Jewish people to understand that Jesus came for them also. He was loyal to Jesus, and once committed, he never wavered. He served the Lord. His past was totally forgotten. You know, he is traditionally considered as the author of the first gospel in the New Testament. He first recorded the information of Matthew, tells of a meeting between him and Jesus. He's giving his own story. At that time, Matthew's name was Levi. He was the son of Alphaeus. What are we learning out of this? His ability to keep records of taxes must be the one that helped him to keep records of what's happening in Jesus' time, and therefore give him the basic. We are told in the Synoptic Gospels, they copied from each other or borrowed from each other. So record-keeping experience may lead to your calling. And it's important to ask yourself as a leader whether you keep records. You know, anybody who doesn't keep record condemns himself to repeating the past. And unfortunately, you are likely to repeat the bad past. So, but if you keep records, there are lessons you can draw yourself in the future, and people that you leave behind are likely to draw, and so to help them. Are we not grateful to God that Matthew was able to record for us the life of Jesus, which still blesses us up to date? So as a leader, what is your belief about record keeping of your organization, history development? In order, and we write the history for 3 reasons. Number 1, so that at least people don't rely on hypocritical type of information where they are not sure. Once it's written correctly, it will help people not to develop cults and stories. Number 2, we write history so that we ourselves can go back to it and make reference, so that we don't fail to keep to grow in our leadership. And thirdly, we keep the record for posterity. And I think it's important as a leader to remember this leader called Matthew and ask yourself, am I keeping records? You know, when Jesus called Matthew to follow him, he was a tax collector, remember? And these people were hated. You know, it was a reviled profession in ancient Judaism. You'd have no dignity as a Jew to agree to collect taxes for the Romans. You know, of course, we don't know much else about him, like I said earlier. Aside from hurtful mentions in the gospel. But it's important to understand that this background of tax collection, he was able to go over it and still become an influence in the nation. Despite the fact that the church has long considered him the author of the Gospel of Matthew, little else could be known except that the tax collector became a righteous apostle of Jesus. You know, you may be similar in your background. You went to a high school which has no name. Well, the school I went to had a bad habit of calling other schools bush schools. You know, and sometimes you think you cannot end up anything because of the kind of high school you went to. Nobody knows about it. When you ask, where did you go to high school? Kakokeka. Where is that? Never heard of it. My friend, do not get tied up to that. Even if you have an unknown background, God can use you in a new way. What matters even more is your potential, more than your history. And I think that will be something you need to tell yourself. Unknown background cannot stop you doing God's mission, helping the group God has given you to go to a better place. While Mathew is honored as a martyr, no one knows for sure where or how he died. We don't have him. Tradition does not give us his death. Various accounts say he was beheaded. One of them say he was beheaded. Another says he was stoned. Another one says he was burned. Even another one talks about being stabbed. And of course, it's also possible he died of natural causes. You know, later apocryphal texts emerge claiming to be written by him, Mathew, and some early church fathers even supported some of these other texts. But the works only survived in fragments and quotations, and modern scholars are divided on their authorship. So the only book that remained full of his writings is the book of Mathew. The others are fragments, which you can't get the whole story. You know, God himself, if he wants your legacy to influence future generations, will protect the legacy he wants you to have. So what you write, and he doesn't intend it to be for legacy, it will get lost. What he wants to last, he will give somebody after you are dead an interest in your writings, an interest in your records that can make it, even give it a new life. How many books have been written posthumously after somebody has died, and they have gone on to be bestsellers? So the important thing is record. But please be aware that God himself will rule and overrule to ensure that what matters is what will end up being your legacy. You know, virtually everything we really know about Mathew comes directly from the Gospels. You know, here he is mentioned in all the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And is also, of course, listed among the disciples in the book of Acts. So that's where we get to know his name. There are parallel passages, and if you look at all of them, there are about 7 mentions of him. You can start getting a story out of it. But only one of those paragraphs, of those passages, gives us any substantial details about him. So he has a brief story. He writes the story of Jesus, and even though he is the one who is writing the story, he doesn't make himself a star. He doesn't give his own story. My friend, are you so taken up in your achievements that you can't tell the achievements of your group? Or are you like Mathew, who is so interested in the mission of the group that what you write about, what you expose, is about the group? Another thing we drew out of here, we don't have a lot of information, but the information we have makes us admire the tax collector turned into a righteous leader. Are you aware that the length of your story may not determine the impact and your legacy? There are people, we have stories, we can tell how they grew up, but we don't draw enough lessons out of them. There are not many lessons to draw out of them. So I repeat, the length of your story will not determine the length of your legacy. So simply live your life. Simply carry out your mission and vision and leave your legacy in God's hands. And I think that's something that is important for us to think about. That sometimes we are so taken up in our interest to be famous and to be remembered, that instead of accomplishing things, we are looking at how will this help? How will this give somebody something that can help him? Now, let's not get so caught up in our legacy, hunting for legacy, that we don't accomplish much in our generation. After all, the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 36, talks of David. It says, when David had fulfilled God's purpose in his own generation. So more than interest in a legacy is interest that you make an impact in your own generation, that whatever you feel God has called you to do, whether in business or in community work or in civil service, that you do it well enough that people in your generation are going to benefit. You know, Matthew, Mark, and Luke have parallel accounts of Jesus calling this particular tax collector to become a disciple. Interestingly, this tax collector, Matthew, calls this person in the story the same, like he's not talking about himself. But Tracy mentioned the fact is Levi. Just look at Matthew chapter 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. That's how the guy was called. Also in Mark chapter 2 verse 14, as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting on the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. Then in Luke chapter 5 verse 27, we read, "After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. 'Follow me,' Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him." Jesus has been picking fishermen. Why would he take somebody from his career where he is earning a lot of money? It's because Jesus' work requires any and all professions. If the church is going to achieve the calling, we must not limit the work of God to pastors. We must go for tax collectors, for lawyers, for doctors. Everybody must get involved in God's work. Luke was a doctor. Matthew is a tax collector. They all participated in building God's kingdom. Professionals can also be spiritual leaders if only they are given opportunity. So you as a professional, do not start taking yourself any less. Use your professional influence to build God's kingdom and for the good of the community God has given you to follow, to lead. You know, there are several possible explanations of difference. Why is he called Levi at one time, then Matthew in another? Some argue that Levi was this person's tribal name. You know, each of us has a village name, meaning he belonged to the tribe of Levi. But that Matthew, the name that is popular, was more personal name. That's one possibility. Others suggest this person was originally named Levi, but that Jesus called him Matthew. The same way the guy called Simon became Peter. And it's also possible that it's simply a matter of him having a Greek name, Matthew, and a Hebrew name, Levi. So both are his names. That happened with the Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul. Since this person was a Jew who worked for the Romans, it would be surprising to learn, it would not be surprising to learn that he was known by both names. In other words, it's important to understand that you can be both somebody who is a Levite, somebody who had certain associations, but you can also be a tax collector, and then you can become an apostle of Jesus Christ. So what do we learn out of that? That it will be important to understand when God calls you, you can't tell him your background won't allow you to achieve. Again, we have repeated it time and time again. Do not allow your past to interfere with your future. It cannot do so if you allow it. So look at the future, look at the gifts God has given you, look at the abilities you have, and look here, listen to God's voice. And with the influence God has given you, let the people of your generation benefit from your leadership. You know, Mathew was a tax collector, like we have seen, a publican, someone who was contracted by the Roman government to collect taxes from his people, and therefore was regarded as evil. As a Jew, stepping into this profession was essentially an act of betrayal. You are betraying your people. Tax collectors are very true accountability. So we hear they would be told to collect a specified amount of money, but they could tell people they owed much more. So they would give the government a certain portion, the rest of them are theirs. Tax collectors earned a reputation for telling people they owed more than they owed. They did. And then the pocketing the difference. To the Jews, tax collectors were the embodiment of sin. If you wanted to know who a sinner is, just think of the tax collector. My friend, let me ask you, do you feel like your career forces you to be what you don't want to be? The answer is, Jesus Christ came for such as you. Number two, do you feel like because of your past, you cannot become what God wants you to become? Number three, do you allow shame culture to bring you to shame, and therefore you can't come out to be what God wants you because, hiya, that's the son of the crook. His father was a thief. And you, in the process, you do not bother to do what God wants you to do because of your background. Every time you are tempted to fail to perform what God has called you to do, remember the tax collector called Mathew and remember his achievements. When tax collectors came to be baptized by John the Baptist, they said, the tax collectors asked John the Baptist, what shall we do? What did he tell them? He told them, you can be tax collector. You don't have to stop your career. But don't collect any more taxes than you are authorized to do. So do not condemn everybody in a profession because of a few rotten apples. According to John, it was possible to be a clean tax collector. Interestingly, Mark and Luke don't explicitly label the disciple Mathew as a tax collector. We have to infer that Levi, the tax collector, is also the disciple Mathew. The Gospel of Matthew leaves little room for confusion, however. He is clearly in Matthew called by himself the tax collector. You know, Matthew chapter 10 says, these are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon and Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. So when he writes, he doesn't hide the fact that his background is a tax collector. You know, what I want you to understand is you cannot condemn everybody because of a few people who are doing evil. You know, your profession may not be evil in itself. It's the people that are evil. Any profession that sets out to do good is okay. The fact that people involved in it end up doing bad should not make you condemn everybody. So, you as a leader, do you look down on people because of their past? Do you try to label people tax collector or whatever you label them, and therefore in your group of followers, such a person is unable to contribute because you make him totally uncomfortable and somebody who is not accepted? Then we are learning that you need to accept any and every type. If you have not evidence of anybody doing wrong, the Bible tells us we shall know them by their fruit. Not the fruit they had before they were planted in God's kingdom, but the fruit they currently are having. The Bible says we are all sinners. Isn't that the message of Romans chapter 3, verse 23? But you know, that was not the culture that Mathew was in. At the label of bad sinners, tax collectors being bad sinners, was something that was held. Tax collectors were sinners by trade, lying, cheating, and that's the way they were expected. But after Jesus calls him, isn't it good to accept him as a new person? When then Jesus lumps Mathew as eating with sinners, whatever. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." By calling Mathew, Jesus was proclaiming that no one should be excluded from his movement, not even those society considered as irreparable. And you as a leader should learn that, the leadership of Jesus, in accepting Mathew. Who are people you look down on, and therefore they cannot contribute to your movement, to whatever community leadership God has given you? I think learn from Jesus and clearly accept that God can use anybody and everybody. So there are 3 lessons we must learn from this life. Number 1, that you can, irrespective of your corrupt past, you can become a righteous leader. Number 2, that you as a leader, having known that, should accept everybody. You should not deal with people on their past, on the basis of their past. Deal with them on their present. If one of your followers is doing something wrong, deal with it. Don't start imagining that because of his past, he is evil. I think that's something that you learn. And many leaders kind of create favorites and end up dividing their group. And the group will not achieve what. Remember, as a leader, you are not achieving alone. You can only achieve, you go as a group. And that can only happen when you start accepting everyone who is in the group. But I think the third thing we are learning is there's nothing wrong with a career. What is wrong is what you do in it. John the Baptist told them, tax collectors, I'm not asking you to stop collecting taxes. I'm asking you, do not collect taxes wrongly. Don't be corrupt. So in the same way, do whatever God calls you to do that will help influence the people for the good of the people, to the glory of God. Do it, but do it in such a way that it will be something that you realize you are calling, but it's also something that will benefit the people. Any one of the 12 apostles, Mathew included, was as important to Jesus as anyone else. The only people who saw more of Jesus than others was his kitchen cabinet of Peter, James, and John. But the rest of them were grouped together. You talk about them as one group. But you see, Mathew was an eyewitness who actually took details. He may not be in the kitchen cabinet, but he took details. He even will tell you the story of Peter, James, and John in the Mountain of Transfiguration, because he took details as he listened to the issues at hand. If he had not done that, we would be lacking information. So similarly, do not rely only on the information you are able to access as a leader. Let the whole team contribute to what decisions the group makes about where they are going. Whether you're a business, or you're a church, or you're a community, or you are an NGO, let everybody participate. And whoever has the ability to record, let them record. It will not only be useful in your generation, but it could also be useful in the end. My prayer is that out of the story of Vic's tax collector, you will learn to accept yourself and accept the mission God has given you. Thank you.